It certainly is good to be able to look out and see so many that we've missed getting to see. As a matter of fact, found out over these last few weeks that people that I thought I'd never miss, I actually have. Ain't that amazing? And I'm not going to tell you which one you are, but this truly has been a very different type of time that we've been dealing with, for sure. Something we've never had to experience before, never had to experience before, never had the opportunity to experience before. And I just don't like it that much. I'll just tell you the truth. We are by nature social creatures, and when you're stuck with only one or two people all the time, then the social aspects of it rub thin. Not specifically in my case or anything, but I know that's the case with many of you. While it's true that there are a whole lot less crimes that are being committed now, at least that's what statistics tell us, there's a whole lot more cases of problems with spouses right now, sadly. There are people who are stuck with folks that they've been able to escape from for at least 40 hours a week for so long that when they're with them all the time, it gets rough. And so there is domestic violence rise. Can you imagine that? You're having to be with people that you a few years ago said, I do, and now you're starting to question that. Hadn't never questioned it till now, but now that you're with them all the time, you're questioning it. So it's difficult, something you're having to deal with that you've not dealt with before. But there's obviously a right way to deal with anything that you face, anything that we come upon. God expects us to live in such a way and handle even the difficult situations in the proper way. This, of course, is Mother's Day. And if you know me very much at all, then you know I've got one Mother's Day sermon, and I ain't going to preach it every year. I just ain't going to do it. It's pretty good one, I think, but it gets old after a little while. We need more mamas that fulfill the example of what a good mother is according to the Scripture. We need less that don't. You know, that goes without saying. And sadly, if we only remember mamas one day a year, we're doing them a terrible disservice anyhow, right? You know, or maybe throw in there the birthday and then Mother's Day too. And then Christmas, maybe we'll show up on Thanksgiving and expect them to have some food to feed us. But a number of years ago, I was talking to a lady who was in her 90s, and she was in a nursing home, you know, and she made this observation, and I actually used this at her funeral, and some of the family didn't like it. She said, you know, I found out that all those years I thought my family loved me so much, you know, and then when I got up here to the nursing home, I realized what they really loved was my refrigerator. And her point was, of course, is that nobody came around since there wasn't anybody putting food on the table, and they could just jump in there and eat and say, bye, Mama, wash the dishes yourself, you know. Well, I said that. I even brought that up in a comical type of way and it caused some people to feel real guilty. You know why? Because they was. They never went and saw her. And so they took it out on me. I don't know why that's the case. But we need good mamas. And the Bible, of course, tells us what good mamas are. Now, some might think, well, according to this series that we're involved in, you know, and we're talking about elephants in the church, then mamas would fit right in there. No, that's not right. No. Now, there may be some applications in some instances, but we're not going to make those for sure. We are going to continue on, though, with our Elephants in the Church series. And we're getting to a little bit different type of arrangement as it applies other than the ones that we've looked at already. As a matter of fact, I thought about this for a long time. Breaker. I thought about this for a long time. Listen to this statement. I wrote it down so I wouldn't mess it up. The Bible doctrine of hell is under fire today. That's funny. The Bible doctrine of hell is under fire today. Of course, under fire is in parentheses. What does that mean? It means that the biblical doctrine of hell is being attacked. And it could very well be that that is something that would fit into the category of a not discussed thing in the church. And you know as well as I, that it's not. To some people, that's a turnoff. I mean, if Christianity involves the eternal torment of of the unredeemed forever and ever, then I don't want to hear anything about it. Well, the only problem with that is that genuine Christianity does include that, you see. But far too many people, and sadly many of our own brethren, as we'll see in this lesson, run as far as they can away from such a awful, disturbing topic as hell. Well, why is that the case? In the case of many people, they look upon the biblical doctrine of hell as being a not too good relic from the past views of Christianity and something to be actually apologized for. Really? Should we really apologize for what the Bible says about hell? Is it embarrassing to let people know that you believe that there is such a thing as the eternal punishment of the wicked forever and ever? You know, I mean, if that's what the Bible teaches, isn't that what we should be teaching? Isn't that what we should be accepting? We shouldn't shy away from it, should we? And yet we use these statistics oftentimes to show just how people think in the world. As a matter of fact, back in 2017, a Barna survey asked people if they believed that hell is a real place of eternal punishment. 32% said yes. Now think about that. If you apply that principle across the country, could it be that when we have a society that in many respects doesn't appreciate and respect law and order to begin with, and is not fearful of being put in prison or in jail, that thumbs their noses at policemen and sheriffs and other law enforcement officers, and then on top of that, they don't believe that there's any eternal punishment anyhow, could that be a contributing factor? That people are lawless and reckless in their attitudes and actions? Well, sure it could be. You see, the Bible has the answers that would cause people to want to cleave to that which is good and avoid that which is bad. But if we take hell off the schedule, then maybe it's not so bad after all. I mean, if we buy into what some people are saying, then we would never mention such a terrible subject as eternal punishment. That just sounds bad, doesn't it? How's it supposed to sound? Let me ask you this. Who told us more about hell than anybody? It was the meek and lowly Jesus that did. Believe it or not. Yes, that fellow that said, "Consider the lilies of the field." He also described a place in which their worm dieth not and their fire is not quenched. What's he talking about? He's talking about hell. Now listen to these. I've got some examples of some advertisements in churches' websites and churches' bulletins. Quote, "There is no fire and brimstone here. No Bible thumping, just practical, weedy messages." That sounds like the church for me. That sounds like the preaching for me, don't it for you? Another one. "The sermons here are relevant, upbeat, and best of all, short. You won't hear a lot of preaching about sin and damnation and hellfire." Number 3, the pastor preaches a very upbeat message. It is salvinistic message. But the idea is not so much being saved from the fires of hell. Rather, it's being saved from the meaninglessness and aimlessness of this life. It's more of a soft sell. And this last one. "As with all clergymen, the pastor's answer is God. But he slips in at the end, and even then doesn't get too heavy. No ranting and raving, no fire, no brimstone. He doesn't even mention the H word. The H word, that's a 4-letter word. For a preacher, for a person claiming to be a gospel, for a person claiming to encourage us to do that which is right and avoid that which is wrong, and hell is not a word that can be mentioned. It reminds me a few years ago where certain denominational groups sought to remove all the blood from the songs in their songbooks because that was just very tasteless type thing. For instance, you take the blood of Christ out of Christianity, you ain't got no salvation. You can't take the blood out of Christianity. You can't take hell out of the Bible and end up with the true doctrine of God. And sadly, while those are examples from the denominational world, even some of our own brethren have gone so far as to diminish the biblical view of hell. I'll never forget, as a matter of fact, one of the reasons why that we live in Tennessee today is we went to when I was second grade, we went to Yazoo City, Mississippi, to a tent meeting. We was living in Durant, Mississippi, and we heard Jimmy Allen in a tent meeting. And Jimmy Allen was a hellfire and brimstone preacher back then. But he also served on the Bible department at Harding University. But then he wrote a book called The Fire in My Bones, and he removed the everlasting to the punishment of hell. That's Jimmy Allen. I mean, a hero preacher for many who preached on hell, but then in his later years, he simply denied it. And then there's an elder out at Berrien Drive congregation out in Dallas, Texas, a man by the name of Edward Fudge, who wrote a book entitled The Fire That Consumes. And of course, he took the denominational view, specifically the view of the Seventh-day Adventists and the Jehovah's Witnesses relative to annihilation. There's no eternal punishment. You just go out of existence. And then, of course, there was that noted scholar, F. LaGard Smith, who wrote a book called Afterlife. And in that book, of course, he denied hell as the Bible pictures it. There are many different views that people have taken in trying to avoid what the Bible teaches about the subject. Number one, obviously, there's the simple denial. I mean, you got all these large number of people who say, oh, I believe in heaven and I'm going there, but I don't believe in hell. When the duration of heaven and the duration of hell are spoken of in the same way throughout the Scriptures. As long as heaven lasts, hell lasts. And ultimately we'll see why that has to be the case. And then there are those who we would refer to as conditionalists. And that means that if you, in fact, are a righteous person, when you die, then you do have eternal happiness. But if you are wicked, then you just go out of existence. You just are annihilated. You no longer are here. You see, each of these, as many others we could expand upon, the common aspect of each of these false views of hell is denying that it's everlasting, denying that it's conscious, and denying that it's torment, That's why we've pointed out, with the example of the rich man Lazarus in Luke chapter 16, where some would want to try to make that into a parable, as if a parable would teach something that's not so, which is wrong, obviously. Because here you got a rich man who opens his eyes, and he's no longer in existence. No, he opens his eyes in torment. Oh, that don't fit the narrative, though, if you're an annihilationist, see? So you got to somehow get away from it. What are some of the objections? And you've heard these probably as well as I have. Some of the objections to an everlasting conscious torment in a devil's hell. Number one, a loving God would never do such a thing as that. Now, here's a person who, while he may not realize it, is claiming to know more about God than God knows about himself. A loving God would never, ever come up with some concept like hell. Now, just a minute ago, what did we say about who gave us more information about hell than anybody? Well, that was Jesus. And Jesus is God. And Jesus, as God, God's Son, told us more about hell and the eternal punishment of the wicked than anybody did. So the idea that God is too loving, God is too kind, God is too merciful, God is too gracious to commit someone to eternal punishment, the point is, friends, before we forget it, is that people choose to be lost forever. It's not that God sends them there. It's they reject the means of salvation that's available. It's their choice. As a matter of fact, it'd have to be that case, have to be that way for justice of God to prevail. In Romans chapter 11, verse 22, as clear a passage as there could possibly be. Behold, therefore, the goodness and the severity of God. Now, there's two different aspects of God, all in the same little old words, same little old verse. On them which fail, let's see, severity, but upon those who are goodness. And if thou continue in thy goodness, or thou also shall be cut off. Paul wrote to the church at Rome. And then I like the second and third verses of Nahum chapter 1. God is jealous, and the Lord revengeth. The Lord revengeth and is furious. The Lord will take vengeance on his adversaries, and he reserveth wrath for his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked. The Lord hath his way in the whirlwind, and the storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. I mean, remember there in Romans chapter 1, remember right after Jesus or Paul had said that the gospel is God's power unto save, to the Jew first and also to the Greek, for therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, for it is written, the just shall live by faith. And then in verse 18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Now think about it from the standpoint of God. Just play like you're God for a minute. And here you have planned made this plan for the redemption of mankind. You've incorporated into this plan the necessary element of the death of your very Son, who's sent from the portals of glory to live as a common man, to demonstrate by the things that he said and the things that he did, the Son of God, to be crucified on the cross, to give his life blood, perfect, for the sins of mankind, and yet mankind can thumb his nose at that and say, I don't care. Bye. Now, if you was a father of a child like that, would you be proud of that child? Well, of course not. The most disrespectful thing that could happen. The character of God demands nothing less than an equal eternal punishment with an equal eternal happiness, joy in heaven. It wouldn't be fair if it was any other way, you know. Another explanation that some give is they say, well, hell is eternal in its consequences, but not in its duration. And thus, a justification for the idea of annihilation. You know, if you're just gone, then that means you're gone for good, but there's no such thing as being punished forever and ever. The only problem with that is that example of the judgment of the nations in Matthew chapter 24 and 25. There you have the eternal punishment being the same word used for eternal happiness, everlasting happiness. Same word. Thus, the duration is there, of course, but the consequences and duration go hand in hand. Heaven and hell last the same amount of time. They have to. Now, what does the Bible say about hell? Let's look at a couple of passages here and realize that any question that we have, the Bible gives the answer, and that's the answer we need to give. You know, if any man speak, let him speak as the oracles of God. As is the case with this subject, as with many others, people left to their own devices end up making ideas and doctrines that are acceptable to them, regardless of whether it's scripture or not. If it's able to cause people to feel good about themselves, even though they have no reason to feel good about themselves, spiritually speaking, then multiplied millions will run and flock there to have their conscience soothed, but falsely so, you see. Notice here in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 28 through 31. Hebrews chapter 10, of course, the Hebrew writer has been dealing with the problem of apostasy among first century converts. They are going back. Many of them have forsaken Christianity and gone back to Judaism, of all things. Something had been taken out of the way and nailed to the cross, and yet the difficulties they figure are not as difficult living as a Jew as it is as living as a Christian. Some of them have made it a habit of forsaking the assembly, okay? And so in the midst of that discussion, the Hebrew writer says, he that despised Moses' law died without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses. And then he says this, of how much sorer punishment suppose ye should he be thought worthy, who hath trodden under foot the Son of God, and hath counted the blood of the covenant wherewith he is sanctified as an unholy thing, and hath done despite unto the Spirit of grace. Now, he's asking a question here, and he's calling upon these first century Christians who obviously didn't go to kindergarten like us, and so they're not near as smart as we are, but he expects them to understand it anyhow. If those that lived under the law of Moses received just punishment for their actions, what about the person who treats everything righteous and holy as does an apostate? What about the consequences for that? Counting the blood wherewith you were sanctified as an unholy, looking upon the blood of Jesus Christ as being just a common thing? How should God respond to that? Well, the next verse tells us a little bit more. For we know him that hath said, vengeance belongeth unto me, I will recompense, saith the Lord. The Lord shall judge his people. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of a living God. Warning for sure, for sure. The love that God has manifested towards us, making salvation possible, obviously is a wonderful motivation, but at the same time, God saw fit to use the motivation of avoiding eternal punishment in the devil's hell too. It takes both. I remember a few years ago, and there was an individual who said to Frankie, he said, Freddie's too negative. And Frankie responded, says, look on the top of your battery that's under the hood on your car. Is it just got a positive connection? No, there's a positive and a negative. It would be entirely wrong to spend all the time on the negative, but it'd be just as wrong to spend all the time on the positive and not realize how God designed for them to work together. The positive. When it comes to raising children, if we think that we can only be positive, that's why we've got kids that need to be sent to a reform school running around Walmart. They can't all be subjected to only sweetness and kindness and smileys. Sometimes there has to be some negative attention applied to the rear end. And thus, with both positive and negative, accomplishment can in fact take place. And then in Revelation chapter 14, verse 11, we have a statement made relative to the fact that this punishment is a punishment in which there is no rest day or night. Now that sounds like a continual thing to me. If there's no rest day or night, that means it's a constant, continual punishment. To bring it all together, I'll turn your attention to 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 10 and 11. Paul, as he's been writing to these Corinthian brethren who have been beset by many, many different types of sins, he tells them and just forcefully sets forth what lays before them. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. Now that's everybody. He didn't say 95% of people must. No, he said all. We must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. That everyone, not just 95%, but everyone will receive the things done in his body according to that which he's done, whether it be good or whether it be bad. And then the next verse he says, knowing therefore the terror of the Lord, we persuade men. You know, there's some that you can warn and snatch out of the fire without having to revert to the horribleness of eternal punishment. But others, that's the only thing that'll get their attention. And we must use whatever is necessary to try to encourage people to use good sense, making wise decisions to become Christians and to live faithfully so as to avoid the eternal abode of the wicked. Separation from all that's bad and all that's awful throughout history. Do you really want to be there? I don't. With all the cutthroats and thugs throughout history? Do you want to be there with the serial killers and baby killers and all that have done vile things down through the history of mankind? That's what awaits. A place prepared for the devil and his angels. And we need to do everything within our power to avoid such a place as that. Now, just to tell you the truth, percentages of people who are hearing sermons on hell today are probably very few. Very few. But the bad thing is that probably all last year, the percentage of people hearing lessons on hell was probably just about as few. But it doesn't go away just because it's not mentioned. We got to mention it. We have to teach the whole counsel of God, and we have to be encouraged to escape the horrors of hell through obedience to the simple commands of the gospel and being faithful thereto. Are you in such a position as that today? Have you obeyed the gospel? Or are you a Christian, a child